Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be exploring something pretty unique,
Yeah.
an excerpt from The Sugar Palm Inn. It's a short story, and it basically takes the nativity story that we're all pretty familiar with and reimagines it in French colonial Vietnam.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, so we're talking like turn of the century Vietnam,
Okay, so it got like a really interesting cultural context then.
Exactly. Yeah, a really interesting mix of Vietnamese folklore
Hmm.
and the anxieties of living under colonial rule, and then all of this is building towards this prophesied arrival of an infant king.
Oh, wow. So there's a lot going on there.
There's a lot going on, yeah.
I'm intrigued already.
So to kind of set the stage for you,
Okay.
imagine you're in Cai Mi. This is like a peaceful village in Vietnam,
Mhm.
and life has revolved around rice farming for generations.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, these outsiders arrive because the French government has ordered a census.
Oh, so like they're shaking things up a little?
Yeah, it's a big disruption, right?
Yeah.
And the census, it wasn't just about counting people.
Right.
It was really a way for the French to assert their control over the Vietnamese.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, force them to kind of conform to the system they never asked for.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and so it creates this like underlying tension in the village.
Right.
This clash between those who see the census as an economic opportunity
Oh, interesting.
and those who fear that it's going to erode their traditions.
So like, are there certain characters that kind of embody each of those viewpoints?
Oh, absolutely. And it's really palpable in the way the story describes the outsiders.
Yeah.
You know, they're described as loud, disruptive,
Hmm.
disrespectful of local customs.
Hmm. Yeah, so they're kind of like the walking embodiment of these anxieties.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like they embody the anxieties of colonialism itself.
I see.
And then on top of all of that, we have this story of this notorious woman
Oh,
who arrives in Cai Mi.
okay.
She sets up shop, attracts a lot of attention, but her story ends tragically.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, she and a guest are found dead under mysterious circumstances, and her house becomes known as, like, the haunted house.
Oh, so this is where like the Vietnamese folklore element comes into
Yeah,
play.
exactly. This is where it really kicks in.
Okay.
We hear about ghostly figures, strange noises,
Okay.
and then there's this, like, chilling detail of the word people written in blood on the wall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty creepy.
That's really creepy.
But it's so much more than just like a spooky element.
Right.
It speaks to this Vietnamese belief that the spirit realm can interact with the physical world, you know, like leaving messages for the living.
Oh, so it's like a warning from beyond the grave.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not just scary, it's a warning.
I see.
And it seems to come true
Oh, no.
when this young troublemaker named Ty Face dares to enter the house.
Okay.
And he emerges severely injured, and so it just fuels the fear surrounding this place.
So this event like really has a big impact on the village then.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it casts a long shadow over Cai Mi, especially because it coincides with whispers of this prophecy.
Oh, so there's a prophecy in the mix as well.
Yeah, the sudden appearance of this sugar palm tree
Right.
is interpreted as a sign that an infant king is coming.
Oh, wow. So like a savior, a leader?
Yes, someone who's going to liberate the Vietnamese people from colonial rule.
So amidst all this fear and uncertainty,
Mhm.
there's this like glimmer of hope.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the villagers are really looking for a savior. They're looking for a sign that things will get better.
Right.
And this anticipation reaches a fever pitch on Christmas Eve with the arrival of a northern Vietnamese couple
Okay.
at the Sugar Palm Inn.
At the inn.
Yeah, and the innkeeper, Uncle Tam, he's already struggling to accommodate all the visitors.
Oh, right. From the census?
Yeah, exactly. He's got no space.
Okay.
But he sees this couple, you know, they're desperate. The wife is very pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And something compels him to offer them shelter for the night.
So it's like a small act of kindness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it feels so significant.
Right, because of everything else that's going on.
Exactly. Yeah, especially when you consider Uncle Tam's own past.
Oh,
He's struggled with poverty.
Yeah.
His wife had a really difficult childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like he sees himself in this couple.
That makes sense.
And it's this act of kindness that seems to set off this series of extraordinary events.
Oh, wow. So what happens?
Okay, so the next morning, Mr. Boyne, this respected villager who was like on the brink of death,
Okay.
he recovers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just like that. And he feels compelled to lead everyone to the Temple of Heaven,
Okay.
where they witness this comet blazing across the sky.
Wow, a comet.
And at the same time that this incredible celestial event is happening,
Okay.
Ty Face, the boy who was injured after entering the haunted house,
Right.
he suddenly recovers and he's seen running.
Oh, wow.
And as if that wasn't enough, Uncle Tam's own son, Puppy,
Okay.
who has also been ill,
Mm-hmm.
he suddenly recovers and joins Ty in running through the village.
So there's like all these miraculous recoveries happening at the same time.
Exactly. It's a moment of pure wonder. And it leaves the villagers questioning if the prophecy is finally coming true.
So is this a sign of the infant king's arrival?
It's like the story is holding its breath, waiting for the answer to be revealed.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what happens next.
Me too.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, huh?
Yeah, like, is it all connected to the prophecy?
Right.
Is this the infant king about to make an appearance?
I mean, it's all happening at the same time.
What I find so fascinating is how the story blends elements of the Christian nativity with Vietnamese folk beliefs,
Oh, yeah.
all against this backdrop of French colonialism. It's such a unique narrative.
It really is. And it's like you were saying before, that element of colonialism, that anxiety, it's like woven throughout the whole story.
Exactly. And we see it most clearly in that clash between the Vietnamese villagers and the outsider.
Yeah, for sure.
Remember how the census officials were described?
Oh, yeah, like disruptive, disrespectful, dangerous even.
Yeah, and then that sense of danger is like amplified by the story of that notorious woman.
Right, like her very presence just disrupts the whole social order of Cai Mi.
Yeah, and then her tragic death and the haunting.
It all just adds to this feeling of unease.
Yeah, like it's a microcosm of the larger cultural conflict.
Right. These outsiders arrive with their own values and behaviors, and they clash with the traditions of Cai Mi.
And it's not just about values and behaviors, it's also about economic disparity.
Yeah, for sure. The visitors have money, which means they have power.
Right, and many of the villagers are struggling to make ends meet.
It's like a stark reminder of those power dynamics that are inherent in colonialism.
Yeah, and it's in that reality where the prophecy of the sugar palm becomes this beacon of hope.
Oh, absolutely.
It represents this belief in a future where the Vietnamese people can reclaim their autonomy.
Right. Take control of their own destiny.
And then you have that ambiguous ending. It leaves us wondering if that hope will be realized.
Yeah. Will the infant king actually emerge and lead the Vietnamese people to liberation, or will their hopes be crushed?
It's like the story is asking us to consider what's possible, even in the face of oppression.
That's a really powerful message.
And it's not just the themes that are interesting, but the way the author uses language
Oh, yeah.
to create this atmosphere of colonial Vietnam.
Totally. Those descriptions of Cai Mi, the bustling bars, the eerie haunted house, the rice paddies.
It's so immersive.
It really is. You feel like you're right there.
And that's what makes this reimagined nativity story so powerful. It's not just a retelling, it's a transplantation of that narrative into a completely different cultural landscape.
And by doing so, it invites us to consider the universality of certain human experiences, like hope, fear, faith, longing.
Right, those things that connect us all.
Exactly. But at the same time, it acknowledges the specific historical and cultural contexts that shape those experiences.
It's such a delicate balance, and the author strikes it beautifully.
They really do.
What about you? What stood out to you the most?
You know what really grabbed me was the ending.
Oh, yeah, the recoveries and the
Exactly. It's just this powerful sense of wonder and possibility.
Mm-hmm.
But it also leaves you with that uncertainty, like, are these events truly miraculous or just coincidental?
And that's what makes it so compelling, right?
Yeah, you're left thinking about it long after you finish the story.
The nature of miracles, the power of belief, the potential for transformation.
All of that in this short story. It's pretty amazing.
Makes you think about all the things we can't explain, right?
It really does. Like, what are those forces that shape our lives? And, you know, those moments where the impossible just seems to, like, bump right into reality.
And I think that's the real power of this story, right?
Yeah.
It reminds us that even when we're faced with all this like oppression and uncertainty, the human spirit can still endure. Hope can still exist, and there's always a possibility.
Yeah, that possibility of a better future.
Yeah, and that's something we can all hold on to.
Definitely.
Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into the Sugar Palm Inn,
Okay.
I want to leave you with this thought. What other familiar stories could we reimagine in different cultural contexts?
Oh, that's a good question.
You know, like how would those reinterpretations challenge our perspectives and offer new insights into these timeless themes?
I mean, every culture has its own stories.
Right.
And its own way of seeing the world.
Exactly.
So by, like, exploring those stories,
Yeah.
we open ourselves up to new understandings, new ways of thinking, even new ways of connecting with each other.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deep into the world of stories.
That's what it's all about.
Until next time, fellow deep divers.
The Sugar Palm Inn. Preface: Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. During the 1st century, Judea was under the rule of the Roman Empire. At that time, Emperor Augustus issued an order to conduct a census of the Roman Empire. According to the decree, everyone had to return to their hometown to be registered. This short story is set in an intercultural context, with Bethlehem of Judea being portrayed as the village of Cai Mi in South Vietnam during the French colonial period. A month had passed, and the typically tranquil Cai Mi village, Cai Mi or Cai Mi means a Vietnamese bajetchu, was suddenly bustling with the footsteps of numerous unfamiliar visitors. Residents of the nearby Cai Chum village, Cai Chum would mean a ceramic jar for storing water. In the short story, Cai Chum village is famous for producing high-quality ceramic jars for southern Vietnam. Looked at Cai Mi village in astonishment and inquired, "Hey, where are all these people coming from?" The people of Cai Mi rolled their eyes, spat, and vented their frustration with curses. "Oh my goodness! Where did they all come from? They're from Cai Mi. Come on, stop talking nonsense. They don't look like Cai Mi folks. Why did they come here?" The Cai Chum villagers glanced around cautiously, lowered their voices, and whispered, "Are Cai Mi villagers planning some secret gathering against the colonial rulers?" The people from Cai Mi raised their eyebrows, looked around suspiciously, and responded, "Grandpa, talking too much can get you into trouble these days. You never know if, tomorrow, your lifeless body might be displayed in Cai Chum's shooting square. If it ever happens, then, don't complain why I failed to warn you in advance." Just as the people of Cai Mi had expressed their criticisms, the unfamiliar guests were originally from Cai Mi. However, when speaking the Cai Mi dialect, they sounded like stuttering grown-ups or children stumbling over their words. In the morning, they arrived in Cai Mi. In the evening, as dusk settled, the guests gathered at various bars in the village, one group after another. They chatted from morning until late at night, giving the impression of a village wedding celebration for the eldest son of Mr. Nok, the head of the village. Every day was the same, and every guest seemed the same. They all returned well past midnight to their accommodations. When the bright morning light filtered through their windows, they couldn't care less. The guests kept their eyes tightly shut, sleeping soundly until noon. Groggily rising from bed, they mumbled and cleared their throats. After that, the guests headed straight to the bar. Instead of returning to their lodging after drinking, they led each other in groups of 3 or 4 to the village's well. On the way, they spat out saliva mixed with green phlegm. Some guests were too inebriated, stumbling and falling by the roadside, like toppled hollow trees. Lying on the village road, they loudly retched, the putrid smell attracting swarms of flies that buzzed around a dark corner of the road. Some guests stumbled, dancing with unsteady steps, singing as they walked. Their songs were coarse, and their lyrics were obscene. Cai Mi's young women, who usually laughed and played on the streets, found themselves isolated because of the new arrival. In the afternoon, the village's women usually gathered to draw water from the well for dinner. But since the unfamiliar guests arrived in Cai Mi due to the census for the entire Indochina, the village's streets suddenly became deserted, and the well was devoid of any women. Cai Mi village had enjoyed peace for as long as anyone could remember. With Mr. Nok at the top, the village council below, and the youth self-defense group, the village's inhabitants lived in peace like ripe golden rice in the fields. This unity had been the way of life for 1,000 years, like a daily ritual. However, due to the arrival of these strange guests, the peaceful skies over Cai Mi village vanished in an instant. Upon entering the village gate, the unfamiliar guests automatically divided Cai Mi into 2 opposing groups, the welcoming and the opposing. The welcoming group included the owners of bars, restaurants, and inns. When they saw the guests, these owners were naturally delighted, their faces radiant as if they were preparing for a grand welcoming ceremony. This was not surprising given that Cai Mi had a small population and limited land. Nearby Cai Chum village had a French army camp, giving them an edge. Cai Chum had something to offer, while Cai Mi had little. During regular days, Cai Mi's inns for guests were typically deserted, except for numerous flies eagerly waiting for an opportunity. It was no wonder that all the inns in Cai Mi, due to the census, displayed no vacancy signs. What stood out the most were Cai Mi's bars. They were filled with people and the scent of alcohol day and night. The bar owners, who usually had stern faces, now looked as excited as young girls before dating. The reason for their excitement? Well, what else but money? As the saying goes, money brings smiles. Money brightens the eyes. Money is stored in jars. Money fills the stomach. However, these were neither copper nor bronze coins. This type of currency has no more value. If someone were to receive such coins as a tip, the waiter wouldn't even bother picking them up. Nowadays, people only talked about silver and gold, likely because every guest returning to Cai Mi seemed to have an abundance of money. They carried sacks of gold coins, bearing the image of the great Emperor Napoleon of the Empire French. A ramshackle house in the village was worth 100 silver coins, while the Temple of Heaven, the Vietnamese worship heaven, the supreme being in their own beliefs, at the village's end was worth 1,000 gold coins. Yet, upon entering the bars, the guests casually tossed handfuls of gold coins onto the table. The melodious clang of the gold coins hitting the ground delighted onlookers. If they pleased the guests, the waiters might even receive a silver coin as a tip. No wonder whatever the guests desired was theirs for the taking, from wine to women. The opposing group included the head of the village, Mr. Ngoc, and the village council. Cai Mi's young women were renowned for their beauty and virtues, and for as long as anyone could remember, Cai Mi had never needed to enforce laws that led to girls being cast adrift on the river. The Tien River flowed past the village, and its waters had always been red, but from red mud, not blood.
Unexpectedly, as the guests arrived in response to the census order for all of Indochina, the vultures serving the French soldiers' camp in Kai Chum cautiously turned their attention toward Cai Mi to assess the situation. 3 weeks prior, despite warnings from both near and far, a notorious young woman from the region nonchalantly knocked on the door of a house with a "For Rent" sign in Cai Mi village. As soon as the girl moved in, shortly afterward, unfamiliar guests crowded both the front and back doors. No one in the village said a word, but exactly 2 days later, her lodging house was engulfed in flames. At midnight, the fire raged from the living room, licking the wooden walls in the front. Fanned by the wind, the fire shot up high. Thanks to the intervention of the youth self-defense team, the house remained standing, albeit charred and smoky in the front. As the fire died down, the French arrived. The intelligence agent set up an office right in the courtyard of the Temple of Heaven, suspecting arson. The woman refused to give in after the fire. She called workers to prepare the front of the house and resumed her profession with determination. Life went back to normal, and men returned to her house. Laughter echoed from one corner of the street in the evening until late at night. People came and went, and the notorious woman rejoiced as the fun returned. For the span of about a week, a shadow of fear loomed over the village of Cai Mi. It all began on a tranquil morning when Mr. Bo, the caretaker of the Temple of Heaven, let out a blood-curdling scream as he passed by the residence of the notorious woman. Startled, the villagers hurried to the scene, only to discover the house wide open. Inside, an eerie and chilling sight awaited them. 2 lifeless bodies dangled from a crossbar, one belonging to the woman and the other to one of her ill-fated guests. Members of the French intelligence agent, FIA, that had plagued the village before had returned. The intelligence agent summoned Mr. Ngoc, the village council, and even the elderly Mr. Bo for questioning. Yet, just like in the previous case, the intelligence officers could not unmask the culprit. Eventually, FIA closed the case, and the French troops withdrew to their barracks in Kai Chum village. However, starting from that fateful day, the lodging house became a haven for ghostly apparitions each night. Ghostly figures of a man and a woman swayed gently in the air, and eerie sounds emanated from the charred house. On a moonlit night, a keen observer even spotted 9 drops of red blood descending from the main crossbar to the brick floor, forming the word "people" in distinctly written Chinese characters. The villagers exchanged whispers of puzzlement, pondering the significance of the number 9 and the choice of "people" in the message. Why not inscribe it in the Vietnamese script? Someone gently reminded the perplexed crowd. Our ancestors used to say, "Sacrifice 9 cattle for a complete ritual." And let's not forget, she's not Vietnamese. She hails from Guangdong and doesn't know our language. Tai Scarred Face, a notorious troublemaker in the village despite his young age of 10, was infamous for causing mischief and petty theft. He occasionally ventured into the neighboring villages to act as a middleman for foreign soldiers. When the owner of a sheep herd once scolded him for pilfering a piece of meat, Thuy's scarred face took offense. In the evening, he summoned his gang to a hut in the heart of the Cai Mi fields. Together, they slaughtered the largest ram in the flock and roasted it on the spot. For some inexplicable reason, in the dead of night, Thuy's scarred face dared to sneak into the haunted house. The following morning, as Mr. Bo passed by the scorched dwelling, he discovered Thuy's scarred face sprawled on the ground, his face battered, and his limbs limp as if devoid of bones. They rushed him home, provided warm porridge, and invoked the spirits of the 9 realms. He didn't regain consciousness until the following day, but his limbs remained as weak as a wilted plant. When questioned, he offered no words, his complexion pallid. The villagers were thrown into a state of alarm, whispering among themselves, "It's clear. This must be the consequence of that curse with 9 drops of blood forming the word, people. Thuy's scarred face is the first victim. Who in our village will be the second? Tonight, it's the 24th of December and the clock is ticking towards 11 in Cai Mi, just 1 more hour to go before the stroke of midnight." The night envelopes the village in darkness, with the distant sounds of gongs from the watchtower in Kai Chum resonating through the air, marking the preparations for the midnight shift. A mournful cry wafts from the direction of the haunted house, and the street reverberates with the clatter of hooves as horses gallop through. Laughter and merrymaking spill out from the bustling bars. It's a scene reminiscent of any other late night, with the harmonious blend of music, string instruments, singing, and the heavy breathing of the inebriated patrons streaming from the inviting doorways of the animated bars. Beneath the night sky, as the year draws to a close, Uncle Tam, the owner of the sugar palm inn, stifles a yawn. For several weeks now, he's been in the unfortunate position of having to shake his head and turn away guests, as every inch of the inn is crammed with lodgers. The inn's living room furniture has been temporarily removed to accommodate more than 30 men, and even the storage room, once a repository of old items, has been tidied up to provide sleeping space for 10 guests side by side. A curious guest from Phnom Penh notices the brightly painted signboard of the inn, the Sugar Palm Inn, and questions, why the unusual name for a place that isn't known for sugar palm trees? Why not name it the Cai Mi Inn? An observant guest from Laos chimes in, indeed, calling it the Cai Mi Inn would be more fitting, as Cai Mi is a village known for its wheat cultivation. The locals here make French-style bread, which they sell to the French soldiers. Hence the village's name, Cai Mi. Looking at the 2 guests, Uncle Tam Tang muttered, "This matter, to be honest, I'm not entirely certain." As their conversation came to a pause, the 2 guests turned to the inn's owner, speaking cautiously. "What's your take on this matter?" Uncle Tam cast a glance at the inn's entrance, lowered his head, and spoke in a hushed tone, as if discussing a matter of national significance. "Well, you see, I'd like to discuss the origin of the inn's name. You just asked why this place is called the Sugar Palm Tree, didn't you?"
Uncle Tam nodded and sighed. "I'll explain.
In the past, the village faced an epidemic. Many lives were lost, but some survived.
The people of Cai Mi scattered to various places in Indochina.
So, when the French governor conducted a census, the descendants of the villages returned to the village for registration. I can say that Cai Mi was nearly deserted, resembling a graveyard, for years, at one point. Then, for some reason, an old saying emerged: a sugar palm grows in the middle of March. It's an auspicious sign for the birth of a newborn king.
Children from the wheat fields gathered and recited this saying.
They claimed that a monk in a brown robe, resembling a hermit, had visited them. The monk had taught them the saying, instructed them to memorize it, and even gifted them a box of coconut candy. He didn't divulge his name, though. Uncle Tam Thuy discreetly cast a gaze toward the inn's entrance and spoke in hushed tones. "It's been over a month since these 2 arrived, so I've mustered the courage to discuss this. Please, keep this conversation low-key and avoid creating a commotion in the village." Last March, something extraordinary happened when the village gate suddenly cracked open to reveal the sugar palm tree. This tree grew astonishingly fast, casting its branches and leaves to provide shade over a portion of the sky. The entire village watched, anticipating something momentous. When I returned here last year to be with my grandparents, I inherited the entire tavern from them.
I promptly christened it the Sugar Palm Tree Inn. The inn's owner let out a long sigh and responded.
We've been discussing this for over a year now, yet we've seen no sign of the promised event. It's been an entire month, and those who left the village and have returned were expected to bring about some change. Unfortunately, they've simply revolved around the bars, never showing any inclination to lead us into any battles. Frankly, Mr. Ngoc is greatly disappointed. Curious, the guest from Phnom Penh asked.
I see. I thought the village would be peaceful now after the house fire and the appearance of those two mysterious corpses.
Hasn't the situation improved?
The inn's owner replied.
Yes, you're right. Our village is peaceful, but the neighboring ones aren't. Vultures haven't gone away, and those corpses were taken out to sea for vultures to gnaw on.
The well-informed guest from Laos chimed in. I recall Prophet Trang Trinh wrote about the birth of an infant king in Cai Mi village.
Are you, the inn's owner, aware of this?
The inn's owner nodded and said.
Yes, I've heard about it. Looking around cautiously, the inn's owner continued in a whisper.
Mr. Ngoc informed us of this.
He also mentioned that, as per Prophet Trang Trinh's text, when the infant king is born, a comet will appear in the middle of the sky. Furthermore, the prophecy suggests that the lame would miraculously rise and run like deer on the road to bear witness to the birth of the newborn king. The inn's owner covered his mouth and whispered, his voice trembling.
I've shared this information with very few of us.
Please, keep this quiet.
We don't want to draw attention from secret agents.
People interpret Trang Trinh's prophecy and claim that the infant king, once born, will lead our people to drive out the colonial invaders from Vietnam. The inn's owner emphasized, his voice quivering. Yet, it's been over a year, and we've seen no sign of the infant king. The guest from Phnom Penh seemed disinterested in the current topic and changed the subject. I heard that a young thief from the field sneaked into the haunted house in the middle of the night to steal, and the youth self-defense team broke his limbs. Is that true, inn's owner?
The Cai Mi village shifted quietly in the middle of the night.
In the distance, the haunting howls of dogs reverberated, each cry carrying an eerie echo, as if a restless spirit wept for 100 days, forgotten and unburied. In the depths of night, the Sugar Palm Inn's owner stifled a yawn, realizing the lateness of the hour. Peering out the door, Uncle Tam pondered the need to secure the money chest. His thoughts then drifted to his son, who had been suffering from a severe illness for almost a week, a fever burning within him like a white-hot oven. Just 2 days ago, the boy had suffered a terrifying seizure, his limbs convulsing, and his face contorted in anguish. Uncle Tam hastily applied an exceptional cold compress oil. After a few anxious moments, the boy's eyes steadied, and his breathing returned to normal. The previous evening, Uncle Tam and his wife had deliberated about the possibility of taking the boy to Saigon for treatment. There, they had heard of a shaman known for his traditional remedies, particularly for ailments imported from Cambodia. Victims of poisonous snakes' bites, venomous insect stings, swollen lips, and blanched eyes would find immediate relief under the shaman's care. Uncle Tam's thoughts returned to their imminent departure the next morning. Awakening, Uncle Tam got up and proceeded to securely lock the inn's wooden door. A momentary furrowed brow came over him as he heard Lulu, the dog, barking in the courtyard. He initially thought it might be Mr. Ngoc and the youth self-defense team on a nighttime patrol, observing that the inn was still open. However, Lulu's barking grew increasingly intense and hostile. Uncle Tam frowned, sensing something amiss. If it were Mr. Ngoc and the self-defense youth group, Lulu wouldn't have barked. The dog was acquainted with Mr. Ngoc. Uncle Tam hesitated, recalling an overheard conversation between the Phnom Penh and Laos guests earlier that day. A sense of unease crept over Uncle Tam. He chastised himself for being overly talkative and credulous. Dark thoughts began to surface as he considered the presence of undercover agents or spies scattered throughout Cai Mi, posing as returning villagers registering for household records. A shiver ran down Uncle Tam's spine as he recollected the ominous Kai Chum Hill near the river, the location of a French government-established shooting range for political prisoners. After execution, the prisoners, still in shackles, were cast into the river as crocodile bait. Uncle Tam swallowed hard, eyes wide open, anxiously awaiting the unknown.
Surprisingly, the barking of Lulu abruptly ceased, as if the dog's temperament had changed. It appeared that Lulu had resumed wagging its tail. The cold night enhanced the dog's breathing, lending it an almost meditative quality, like a slow exhalation. Squinting, Uncle Tam discerned the deliberate, rhythmic sound of donkey hooves striking the pebble road. His eyes narrowed further in puzzlement. Why would a donkey be in the village? In this region, had anyone ever been seen riding a donkey? Two figures materialized before Uncle Tam. The man, likely in his 20s, bore a weathered face framed by a thick beard. The other person, a woman, was perched on the back of a donkey, her visage concealed beneath a deep blue veil. The man, gripping the donkey's reins with his calloused hands, approached the inn's counter. He spoke with a pronounced northern accent. "Greetings to the inn's owner from my wife and me." Surveying the situation, the husband gestured around and began with a pleading tone. "We've traveled a long distance, and we are strangers in this village. The hour is late, almost midnight. We hate to trouble you, sir, but we beseech your kindness. Could you possibly provide us with lodging? We won't forget your benevolence." The inn's owner, the sugar palm, appraised the situation, pursed his lips, and firmly responded, "Oh, I understand that you've come from afar, and you've had an arduous journey. However, I'm very sorry, but our inn is fully occupied. There are no vacant rooms available." Though initially rebuffed, the northern man wasn't ready to give up. His voice lowered, laden with urgency. He scratched his forehead and motioned to his wife, seated quietly on the donkey's back. He implored, "Please, sir. My wife and I have endured much on this long journey. It's all due to the census. We find ourselves in a desperate situation. We are strangers here, and my wife is expecting a child. We don't know where else to go. It's a dire circumstance." Uncle Tam, the inn's owner, could now see the gravity of the situation. Dim light from a nearby tavern cast a soft glow, revealing the solitary figure of the pregnant woman. His heart ached, and he felt compelled to help. However, he was faced with a conundrum. The inn's room was already packed with 10 men. Welcoming the husband was possible, but with a pregnant wife, the prospect of squeezing her into the cramped space was an impossible feat. Observing the inn's owner's unyielding stance, the weary husband struggled like a fish flopping helplessly on dry sand. He implored, "Perhaps you know of an available spot, sir? We are ready to leave immediately. I promise not to be a further bother." As he gazed upon the Northman's earnest plea, Uncle Tam's thoughts traveled back to the early days of his marriage. They had been so impoverished, often making do with 2 meager meals a day, a bowl of plain rice accompanied by a meager portion of scraped fish sauce. Back then, his wife had been pregnant with their first child, and she'd toiled each day, bent over to gather scattered grains of rice, striving to make ends meet. Her relentless labor had culminated in her giving birth 2 months early, resulting in a frail and feeble newborn. Witnessing his child's weakness, Uncle Tam had experienced a profound bitterness, but there had been little they could do. They had been a destitute family back then. Gazing at a shooting star streaking across the sky, the owner of the inn made a decision. "All right, here's what we'll do. I'm aware of a shelter in the middle of the field that remains unoccupied at night. I can take both of you there for the night, just for tonight. Tomorrow, my wife and I will head to Saigon, and our room will be vacant. By noon tomorrow, you can return to my inn and stay there for a few days." In response to Uncle Tam's proposal, the Northman's furrowed brow and broad forehead relaxed, and he nodded. Yes, that's perfect. You're incredibly kind. May heaven and Buddha bless you and your wife. What should we do now? We are relying on your guidance. Please, show us the way. My wife and I will follow you immediately." With those words, the inn's owner got to his feet. "In that case, let's set off now. It's already very late." Raising the oil lamp high, he led the way. The flickering flame cast dancing shadows on the 3 individuals and the lanky mule proceeding along the dirt path, which led to the rice and wheat fields. It was the night of December 24th, at the year's end, under a moonless sky. The night was frigid, the biting wind cutting to the bone. Uncle Tam gazed up at the dark heavens. In the distance, the plaintive howling of wild dogs echoed from behind the mountains, while distant fireflies flickered. A few bats flitted through the inky night, and the resonating call of a woodpecker filled the distance. Uncle Tam's thoughts strayed to the haunted house, pondering whether Thuy Scarred Face had indeed encountered ghosts, or if Mr. Ngoc had ordered the youth self-defense group to administer a punishment to the mischievous boy, as rumored. Thinking about the stoic-faced young man from the north, the inn's owner also contemplated his own son, Puppy. Tomorrow, he and his wife would take the frail child seated on a horse's back with them. Though the road to Saigon was swift, it would still require 3 days. Uncle Tam shook his head as he reflected on the French colonial foreigners who largely occupied Saigon. Raising his eyes to the expansive sky, he mumbled an old folk verse, "A sugar palm grows in the middle of March. It's an auspicious sign for the birth of a newborn king." Uncle Tam sighed. It had been over a year now since the sugar palm had started growing. But where was the auspicious sign that had yet to reveal itself? His sigh gradually dissipated into the night sky over Cai Mi village on the 24th of December. For 3 consecutive days, Mr. Bo had been gravely ill. Thin porridge flowed into his mouth but stalled, unable to pass through his clenched teeth. Phlegm gathered in his mouth, forming bubbles at the corners of his lips. Mr. Bo's wide-open eyes were pure white, with flies congregating on them. He coughed hoarsely, and a noxious odor pervaded the room. Mr. Ngoc leaned in, whispering to the village council, "Let's make preparations for Mr. Bo's final journey." However, at the break of dawn on the 25th, as the day began, Mr. Bo did something that surprised everyone. He sat up, his back ramrod straight, and took a few deliberate steps to the window frame. Gazing up at the sky, Mr. Bo, to everyone's astonishment, bolted down the village road as if possessed by a spirit. He reached the Temple of Heaven and came to a halt. With both arms raised, he exerted himself to push open the massive iron doors.
He charged into the incense-filled main hall, illuminated by the morning sun. There, Mr. Bo paused, observing the members of the village council and the gathered crowd. He pointed toward the temple courtyard and then raised his hand toward the sky, but no sound escaped his lips. The villagers from Cai Mi paused their morning prayer, captivated by Mr. Bo's mystifying appearance. Mr. Ngoc signaled the conclusion of the prayer, prompting the villagers to rise to their feet. They followed Mr. Bo into the courtyard. Upon reaching the red brick yard of the Temple of Heaven, an unspoken agreement swept over the crowd. Everyone lifted their heads to the sky, eyes fixed on an unexpected transformation. High above, the previously grey winter sky metamorphosed into a brilliant crimson. Up in the heights, a comet gleamed, spinning in immaculate circles. The inhabitants of Cai Mi village stood in awe, mystified by the inexplicable phenomenon. While still entranced by this bewildering natural occurrence, the villagers suddenly noted a commotion on the village road. Once more, the sound of hurried footsteps reverberated through the thoroughfare. It was the guest from Laos. Gasping for breath, he stopped in the temple's courtyard, pointing in the direction of the Sugar Palm Inn. Thuy Scarred Face and Puppy, both of them. Rush to the inn and see for yourselves. They are chasing each other like 2 young deer down the road over there. Hurry, hurry. The residents of Cai Mi village exchanged bewildered glances. The youth self-defense team whispered among themselves that during their nighttime patrol, they'd heard music resounding across the entire Cai Mi field in the dead of night. Except for the couple from Neret village in North Vietnam, the villagers of Cai Mi, natives of South Vietnam, remained confounded by the unfolding events.